Welcome to the Funeral Channel Network podcast, and welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're doing something that I love doing this kind of thing.
Oh, me too. It's the best kind of topic.
It really is. Because we're taking something that is seemingly small, something you might just accidentally overlook or entirely take for granted, and we're putting it under the microscope. We're
Right.
looking at a whole stack of research and notes to extract the really important nuggets of wisdom for you all.
It's great to be here. And you're completely right. Today's topic is it's deceptive.
Deceptive how?
Well, it seems so small. At the end of the day, it's a piece of paper. But when you really start to peel back the layers, it becomes this massive conversation about psychology,
Right.
about architecture even, and really about how we structurally process the end of a life.
Exactly. So for you listening, we are diving deep into the world of the Gatefold Funeral Program. And stick with us, because our main source material today, a really comprehensive look called The Art and Grace of Gatefold Funeral Programs, it makes a pretty bold claim right off the bat.
It really does.
It argues that this isn't just a brochure, it's not a list of songs, it is an actual moment, a tribute in itself.
Yeah, that's the core thesis we're working with today. The idea that the physical format of the paper, literally the way it folds, the way it opens, the way it feels resting in your hand, actually changes the emotional experience of the person holding it.
So let's set the stage a bit. Why are we looking at a piece of paper? I mean, we live in a world where everything is digital now.
Okay.
We have memorial websites, we have QR codes at the register book. Why does this physical, tangible object still matter so much?
Because grief is physical. I mean, it's a bodily experience. When you're sitting at a service, you need something to hold on to. You need a physical anchor.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the program is very often the only tangible thing a guest takes away from that event. It's a souvenir of a very difficult day.
Right.
And what the research clearly shows is that the design of that souvenir dictates exactly how we engage with the memory of the person we lost.
I absolutely love that phrasing. Design dictates engagement. So let's define our terms real quick before we get into the heavy psychological stuff. When we say gatefold, what are we actually looking at? Because I think some people might hear that and picture a magazine centerfold, or maybe a standard birthday card.
Right, so let's visualize it for a second. Imagine a standard sheet of paper. Your normal bifold program, basically like a greeting card, just folds once, right down the middle.
Like a book.
Exactly like a book. You open it from right to left.
Standard stuff.
Right. But a gatefold is structurally different. Architecturally, it consists of two outer panels that fold inward. They meet directly at the center of the page.
Oh, like a set of double doors.
It's exactly like double doors.
Yeah.
Or theater curtains. Or even the literal gates of a sanctuary. That is the key distinction here. It's not a book you open, it's a space you enter.
Wow. And the source material argues that this specific format elevates the whole item. It takes it from being a purely functional item, like a grocery list or a meeting schedule,
Right.
and turns it into something refined, something intentional and visually striking.
It completely changes the category of the object. It moves it from disposable, something you might toss in the recycling bin on the way out, to an actual keepsake. And our mission today is to really figure out why.
What's happening in the brain?
Exactly. What is happening in the brain and what's happening in the design to make that shift happen?
Well, let's just jump right into our first big section then, the psychology of the fold. This was the part of the deep dive that really grabbed me. I had never once thought about a simple fold having a psychological impact.
Oh, absolutely it does. It's all about haptics.
Haptics.
Yeah, the science of touch and physical interaction. The source describes the act of opening a gatefold as mirroring the emotional experience of remembrance itself.
Mirrors it how? That's fascinating.
The source uses this term, the unfolding metaphor.
Okay.
When you open a standard flyer or a regular trifold brochure, it's usually a very quick, thoughtless motion. You just flick it open with your thumb. It's efficient. It's fast.
It's the way I open my utility bill. Or a takeout menu from the mail.
Precisely. It's purely transactional. But a gatefold, you generally can't just flick it open. You need two hands.
Because it meets in the middle.
Right. You have to place your thumbs on that center seam. You actually have to coordinate your hands to pull the two panels apart gently outward to the left and to the right.
Oh, I see. It's a much more deliberate action.
It is, and that creates pacing. The source argues that unlike a standard handout, the gatefold physically slows the experience down.
That is so counter to how we normally operate.
Right. In a world where you and I are constantly rushing, constantly scrolling and tapping on screens, the gatefold acts as a physical speed bump. It literally forces the guest to pause.
I think that is incredibly important because funerals can be an absolute blur.
A total blur.
You're rushing to get there, you're trying to find a seat, you're maybe feeling deeply anxious about seeing certain people. Your brain is just racing.
Exactly.
And then an usher hands you this object that physically refuses to be rushed. You have to stop and use two hands.
Right. It invites guests to engage much more intentionally. You simply cannot mindlessly consume a gatefold. You have to participate in the act of opening it.
And let's go back to that concept of doors again,
Yeah.
because the text really leans heavily into this metaphor, the panels meeting at the center.
It creates a threshold. That's the architectural term for it. When the panels are closed, you are on the exterior. The source notes that the exterior is usually very minimalist, clean.
The public face.
The public face, yes.
Yeah.
It's the facade of the building.
And then you open them.
And you cross that threshold into the interior. You are physically moving from the outside world into the private heart of the story. It signals a major transition to the brain.
It's almost like the difference between standing on the busy sidewalk and stepping inside the quiet of the church.
That is the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And the paper allows you to perform that transition with your own hands, right there while you're sitting in the pew.
There is also a major signal being sent by the family here, isn't there? I mean, picking this format isn't an accident. They chose this.
No, it's a very strong social signal. It signals care. It signals thoughtfulness.
Yeah.
When a guest receives a gatefold program, the tactile quality and that higher level of presentation, it tells them something immediately without a word being spoken.
It sets an expectation.
It tells them, we didn't just print this off at the last minute because we felt obligated to. We thought deeply about this. We crafted this for you.
It truly honors the person.
It validates the significance of their life. It says this story deserves a set of doors.
This story deserves a set of doors. I really love that.
Right.
Okay, so we have the feeling down. We understand the psychology. Now let's look at the actual structure.
We'll do it.
Section 2 of our deep dive here is architecture and design philosophy, because the source material spends a really significant amount of time comparing the gatefold to the competition, specifically the trifold.
Ah, yes. The ubiquitous trifold, we see it absolutely
The
everywhere.
classic brochure.
The brochure. And look, the trifold is highly functional. It fits neatly into a standard business envelope. It's cheap to mail.
Sure.
But from a strict design perspective, especially for something as important as a funeral, it has what the source calls the clutter problem.
The cluttered problem. Break that down for us. What makes it cluttered?
Okay, visualize a trifold in your head. You take a landscape sheet of paper and you fold it twice, right? That creates 3 very narrow vertical columns.
Right. Like tall, skinny skyscrapers of text.
Exactly. And that creates a massive design constraint. If you are trying to print a beautiful poem or a complex multi-generational obituary or a long scripture passage,
Which people always want to include.
always,
Yeah.
but you are forcing that text into a very tight, narrow column.
So you have to chop up the lines.
You do. You have to break the natural rhythm of the poetry. You have to hyphenate words awkwardly. It compresses the information. It just feels squeezed.
It feels like the text is actively fighting for space on the page.
It really does.
Yeah.
And visually, that creates tension. Now, compare that experience to the gatefold. The source talks about the breathing room advantage.
Breathing room. I like the sound of that.
When you open those double doors, you aren't revealing 3 skinny, cramped columns. You are revealing a broad, expansive interior space.
Because it opens wide.
Wide open. Often the design spans completely across the center panel and even flows onto the inside of the 2 flaps.
So it's essentially a panoramic view.
Exactly, a panorama. It allows the text and the images to finally breathe. You can format a long obituary comfortably, with nice wide margins, without it ever feeling cramped.
So it's the difference between walking down a narrow hallway versus stepping into a wide-open living room.
That's a great way to put it.
And that breathing room probably helps with the emotional processing too, right? Because if I'm reading something incredibly sad, I don't want to feel visually claustrophobic on top of everything else.
Precisely. White space, the empty space on a page, is actually a powerful tool for cognitive rest.
Really?
Yes. It gives your eyes a physical place to rest. It actively lowers the cognitive load.
That makes total sense.
When you are grieving, Your brain is already working in overdrive trying to process the emotions. You do not want to fight a cramped layout just to understand the basic information.
There's another phrase in the design section that I circled about 5 times in my notes, the altar on paper.
Oh, yes. That is a deeply beautiful concept.
Unpack that for us. What exactly does it mean?
It refers to the visual hierarchy that gets created by the symmetry of the fold. Because the gatefold opens perfectly from the center, the human eye is naturally drawn straight to the middle. It creates an undeniable focal point,
Almost exactly like the altar in a church.
or the center stage in a theater. The front cover establishes the tone. It's usually quiet, respectful, understated.
Right.
Then you open the doors, and the interior delivers the deep meaning. The layout is totally balanced, centered, and calm.
Symmetry is inherently comforting to us, isn't it?
It is deeply comforting. Humans are biologically hardwired to find safety in symmetry.
Really?
Absolutely. Chaos feels dangerous to the brain. Asymmetry feels unresolved or threatening. But a perfectly symmetrical gatefold, where the doors meet flawlessly in the middle and the photo is perfectly centered.
That signals order.
It signals order. It subtly tells the brain that despite this massive loss, despite the grief, there is still structure and order in the world.
It's secretly providing order when the guests are feeling completely disorderly inside.
That is the hidden power of good design.
Man, that's powerful. Okay, let's take a tour. I really want to walk through the actual content of these programs.
Let's do it.
Section 3 is a tour of the content. If you're listening and you imagine holding one of these in your hand right now, what are you actually seeing? Let's start with the exterior, the closed state.
The primary keyword for the cover is dignity, and usually a sense of minimalism.
Keep it simple, don't overdo it.
Exactly. The source makes a great point that the cover is not the place for the biography. It is strictly the title page.
So what's on it?
Key elements usually just include the full name of the deceased, the birth date, the death date, and a very meaningful image.
What kind of images are we typically talking about?
It varies quite a bit depending on the family. A high-quality portrait is very common. Ideally a nice headshot where they really look like themselves, happy and at peace.
Sure.
But the source also highlights other design choices, like scenic backgrounds.
Like sunsets over a field. Or mountains.
Exactly. Or water. The ocean is incredibly popular. These are deeply universal symbols of peace and transition.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Or you see a lot of faith-based symbols if it's a religious service. A cross, a dove in flight, praying hands.
So the goal is really just to set the mood right away.
The goal is to keep the text as minimal as possible to maintain a profound sense of calm. You really don't want to overwhelm the guests with details before they've even opened the program. You just want to warmly invite them in.
Okay, so I accept the invitation. I use both hands. I slowly open the doors.
The reveal.
The reveal. The interior. The text calls this the heart of the tribute, what's happening inside.
This is where the gatefold format truly shines compared to the standard trifold. Because you have that altar effect we talked about. Designers will almost always center the key elements right in the middle panel.
Creating those focal points.
Yes. This is exactly where you put the primary photo. Maybe a really great candid shot that truly captures their spirit rather than a stiff portrait.
Oh, I love the candid shots.
The best. Or you might center a featured quote. Or a vital verse of scripture that anchors the entire piece emotionally.
And around that central anchor, I assume, is the actual schedule for the day.
Right, the order of service. That's the functional backbone of the document. You have the welcome, the prayers, the readings, the musical selections, the eulogy, and the closing remarks.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the gatefold accommodates diverse content a lot better than other formats. Can you give me an example of what you mean by that?
Sure. Let's talk about a highly faith-based service. Very often, the family wants to include a very specific scripture passage or maybe the full lyrics to a beloved hymn so that everyone in the room can sing along.
Which takes up a massive amount of space.
It really does. In a trifold, cramming a hymn in there looks messy. The lines wrap weirdly, the text is tiny.
It's hard to read.
But in a gatefold, you can give that hymn prominent, beautiful placement. You can center it entirely. You can make the font large enough for older guests to read comfortably.
And what if it's a completely secular service?
Same principle applies. You can feature poetry, deeply personal reflections written by the family, or maybe a section of favorite sayings.
Oh, like if the person had catchphrases.
Exactly. If the deceased was well known for their unique wisdom or their funny jokes, you can include a whole list of those. The gatefold allows all these distinct elements to exist harmoniously without actively fighting each other for space.
That's brilliant. But what about the back?
Rah.
Or the extra flaps on the side? We've covered the front doors. We've covered the main center stage. What happens to the rest of the real estate?
That brings us to the additional panels. And this is really where we get into the vital separation of emotion and logistics.
Emotion and logistics explain that separation.
Well, you have the deeply emotional core of the service, the touching eulogy, the beautiful photos, the meaningful prayers.
Right.
And then you have the strict logistical details that people simply need to know. The source mentions specific functional inclusions like acknowledgments.
Like, the family thanks you for the beautiful flowers.
Exactly. Or the pallbearer listings, the specific names of the clergy or the officiant, and very importantly, the reception or repast details.
The where are we eating information.
Uh-huh. Right. It sounds trivial when we're talking about grief, but it is practically vital. People need to know where to go next.
Right.
However, from a strict design philosophy standpoint, you really don't want the literal street address of the local banquet hall sitting right next to the sacred prayer of committal.
Oh, yeah. That totally breaks the mood.
It jolts you out of the moment. The gatefold beautifully solves this. It allows you to utilize those back panels or the side-folding inserts strictly for this logistical info.
So it keeps it accessible.
Accessible, yes, but totally separate from the emotional center of the program.
It's respectful compartmentalization.
That is exactly what it is.
Okay, let's get a little technical here. I am admittedly a bit of a stationery nerd, so this next section is right up my alley. Section 4 is all about technical specifications and formats. Because gatefold isn't actually a size, is it? It's a style.
Correct. Gatefold is the mechanism. The actual size you choose really depends entirely on the volume of content you have and the scope of the story you want to tell. The source outlines 3 very common sizing options.
Let's run through them for the listeners. Option 1, the standard.
This is definitely the most common one you'll encounter. It is created from a standard 8.5 by 11-inch sheet of paper. Regular letter size.
Literally the exact same size paper I use in my cheap printer at home.
Yes. But remember, it gets folded inward, so the finished closed size that you hold in your hand is approximately 5.5 by 8.5 inches.
That's actually pretty small.
It is compact. It fits very nicely in a standard purse. It fits inside a men's suit jacket pocket.
So why is it the most popular? Just because of the convenience?
Convenience and cost. It's highly economical to print. You can print it on standard size stock at any print shop. It's easy for guests to hold during the service.
But it doesn't feel cheap.
No, and that's the magic of it. Yet, because of the gatefold mechanism, because of the psychology of those opening doors, it still feels incredibly sophisticated. It may be small, but it never feels cheap.
Okay, but what if the person just had a massive, huge life? What if I have a 1,000-word obituary I need to include, plus a whole collage of family photos? The standard size is going to feel way too tight.
In that case, you graduate up to option 2, the large, or what's sometimes called the booklet size. This one is created from an 11 by 17-inch sheet of paper.
Tabloid size. That is a really big sheet of paper.
It is huge. But again, when you fold those panels down to meet in the middle, the finished closed size becomes 8.5 by 11 inches.
Oh, so the closed program is the size of a standard notebook or a magazine.
Exactly.
That is a serious statement piece.
It has real gravity to it. The primary use case here is for extensive content. Much longer obituaries, multiple photo spreads, very detailed service elements like full liturgical responses.
And aesthetically, how does it feel in the hand?
It genuinely feels like a premium memorial booklet. It allows for incredibly generous, luxurious margins. It just feels substantial because of the sheer space.
I have to imagine there's an accessibility angle here as well, right?
Absolutely there is.
Because at a lot of funerals, the guests lean older, and they might really struggle with small, cramped type.
That's a huge consideration. The large format allows the designer to bump the font size way up. You can use 14 or even 16-point font without ever running out of room on the page.
That is just a practical kindness to your guests.
Practical kindness. I love that term.
Now, the source material did mention a third option, the expanded gatefold.
This one is really interesting from an engineering standpoint. It maintains the exact footprint of the standard sizes, so it doesn't get any taller or wider in your hand, but it includes additional interior panels or inserts.
Like actual extra pages added inside the doors?
Yes, stapled or bound inside.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it just utilizes extra complex folds. It drastically increases the overall content capacity without making the physical object itself unwieldy to hold.
So it's for when you have a massive amount to say, but you still want it to be highly portable. Now, we absolutely have to talk about the paper itself. The source was very, very specific about paper and texture. Can I really just run to the store and use basic copy paper for this?
You technically can, but you really, really shouldn't,
Why not?
because the entire format relies on having very clean, crisp folds.
Oh, and if the paper is flimsy, the doors probably don't close right.
Exactly. We call it the flop factor in the
Oof, the
industry.
plot factor.
If you use lightweight 20-pound bond paper like standard office paper, the gatefold feels incredibly weak. It doesn't stand up on its own. The doors kind of sag inward.
That sounds depressing.
It is. The source heavily emphasizes the critical importance of quality paper. Families almost always choose a heavier stock.
Like a thick cardstock.
Yes, usually an 80-pound or even 100-pound text or cover weight paper.
Wow, that's thick.
It adds real substance. It adds physical durability. When a guest holds it, the sheer weight of the paper feels emotionally significant.
And what about the finish on that paper? Are we talking glossy or matte?
Matte is generally highly preferred for funerals. The source notes that it gives a very soft, non-glare appearance.
Why does the glare factor matter so much?
Think about the lighting environment you're in. Churches and funeral homes very often have bright spotlights pointing at the pews, or harsh, direct overhead lighting.
Oh, right.
If you hand out a highly glossy program, the glare from those lights can actually make the text completely unreadable at certain angles.
You'd be tilting it back and forth trying to read it.
Exactly. Matte paper organically absorbs the light. It feels softer, feels more natural and respectful.
But the source did briefly mention something called a subtle sheen.
Yes. Sometimes it's referred to as a satin finish. This is typically used if you have really high-quality, vivid photographs that you desperately want to pop off the page.
I see.
But generally speaking, the overwhelming trend in memorial design is toward the understated, quiet elegance of a heavy matte finish.
Okay, so we know exactly what we want now. We want a beautiful large gatefold printed on heavy matte cardstock.
The dream combination.
Right. But now, how do we actually make it? Because this honestly sounds pretty complicated to put together.
It can be surprisingly tricky. And Section 5 of our deep dive covers exactly this. Production. Specifically, the battle between DIY and professional services.
This feels like the part of the process where things can go horribly wrong for a family.
Oh, it absolutely is. The source outlines 3 distinct paths you can take. First up is the totally DIY approach.
Who is that approach really for?
It's mostly for families who want absolute creative control over every single word, or families who are working with extremely tight timelines.
Right, like if the funeral is literally tomorrow morning.
Exactly. You simply don't have time to wait for a professional printer to ship a box to you. You have to design it, run to a local copy shop, and fold it yourself.
But there are serious risks involved with doing it yourself. The source lists some very specific challenges.
The single biggest one is panel alignment.
The fold lines.
The crease of doom, as I like to call it.
Aha! The crease of doom.
In a gatefold, remember, those 2 outer doors have to meet absolutely perfectly in the dead center. If your home printer is off by even 1 millimeter, or if your hand slips slightly while you're folding it.
You end up with a weird gap between the doors.
A gap, yes. Or conversely, an ugly overlap where one door crushes the other.
Neither of which looks good.
Or, worst of all, you accidentally design the layout so that text is placed too close to the actual fold and the words just disappear entirely into the crease.
Oh, no. So it says, in loving mem, and then the rest is just swallowed by the fold.
Exactly. It looks terrible. Or you get severe image distortion. If you don't position the central photo perfectly, the fold line literally cuts right down the middle of the deceased's face.
Oh, wow.
It creates this awful visual distortion that can be genuinely distressing to a grieving family when they open the box.
So the DIY route is basically high risk, high reward.
Mostly it's just high stress. It requires immense patience and a very steady hand during a week when you probably have neither.
Okay, so what is the alternative to that stress? The done-for-you service.
This is exactly what it sounds like. It is strictly for families who want a flawless, high-end result without any of the technical anxiety.
So how does it work?
You simply provide the raw content to a company. You send them the text in a document, you email them the raw photos, and a professional designer takes over. They handle the complex layout, the tricky spacing, the alignment, and all the print preparation.
So you're basically paying for peace of mind.
You really are. It completely minimizes errors. It guarantees that those front doors are going to meet perfectly in the middle. It drastically reduces your stress levels when the service date is rapidly approaching.
But there was a really interesting third path mentioned in the material, a hybrid model.
Yes. The source specifically mentions a company called the Funeral Program Site here. They are a vendor that recognized this exact problem, so they offer both DIY templates and full professional services.
So I can literally just buy a digital template from them that is already engineered correctly.
Right. The tricky margins are already perfectly set. The fold lines are clearly marked. All you have to do is drop your personal text and photos into their pre-built boxes.
That's incredibly smart.
It drastically lowers the risk of a DIY disaster while still giving you the speed of printing it locally and the control of writing it yourself.
That seems like a really smart value proposition, allowing families to actively choose their exact level of involvement.
It is. Because for some people, having to make the program is a massive unwanted burden.
Sure, they just want it handled.
But for other families, doing it themselves is a profound act of love. It is literally the very last thing they can actively do for the person they lost. Having those options really matters.
Oh, that's a really profound point. The actual creation of the physical program is essentially a part of the grieving process itself.
It very often is. It's a way of channeling the grief into something beautiful.
Let's move to our final section here, section 6, function and legacy. Because eventually the service ends, the guests all leave, the beautiful flowers wilt and die, but the paper remains.
It does. It outlives the event. First, let's look at the practical function of the paper, actually, during the service. The source calls the program an emotional anchor.
An emotional anchor, what does that mean in practice?
Imagine you are sitting in the church pew. You are highly emotional. Maybe you are actively crying. Maybe you're just totally overwhelmed by the sheer size of the crowd behind you. Focus is incredibly difficult.
It's really hard to look people in the eye when you're crying uncontrollably.
It is. It feels very vulnerable. The program gives you a safe object to look at. It gives you a designated place to direct your gaze downward. It helps guests focus their minds when overwhelming emotions make focusing impossible.
It grounds you in the present moment.
It grounds you, and it functionally orients you. You look down and think, okay, where are we? Oh, right. We are currently at the second hymn. I know it's happening.
It's a map for a very difficult journey.
Exactly. But then, after the journey is over, there is the keepsake quality. Why do these specific Gatefold programs actually endure?
Because I know I have a whole box of funeral programs in my closet. I strongly suspect most people do.
We all do.
Yeah.
And the source makes a brilliant argument that we keep them specifically because of the format itself.
Really?
Yes. Because of that distinctive fold and the highly polished appearance we talked about, guests are vastly less likely to ever discard them.
Well, yeah, you don't throw away a book.
Exactly. You throw away a cheap flyer, you throw away a grocery receipt.
Yeah.
But a heavy cardstock Gatefold program fundamentally feels like a book. It feels like an object of inherent value.
The source even mentions that families very often frame them.
Yes, they frame the interior spread, because remember earlier we talked about that altar on paper concept.
Right, the perfect symmetry.
If you open a beautifully designed gatefold completely flat, that interior spread often functions as a gorgeous, totally symmetrical poster. It's practically designed to be displayed on a wall.
It effectively becomes a piece of commissioned art.
A tangible, permanent record of the life that was honored. This post-ceremony life is very real. These physical things end up tucked inside family Bibles, glued into scrapbooks, or sitting in nice frames on living room mantles for decades.
And there was a very specific piece of practical advice regarding quantity planning that really stuck with me.
Order extra.
Just always order extra, because people take more than one.
Sometimes guests do take an extra for a relative who couldn't travel, but mostly it's because the immediate family will desperately want them later.
Even if you don't think you do right now.
Exactly. You might not realize it on the actual day of the funeral, you were living in a complete fog of grief. But 10 years from now.
When the young grandkids start asking questions about Grandpa.
Exactly. You want to be able to walk over to the bookshelf, pull down that beautiful heavy cardstock gatefold, slowly open those two doors, and say, this is exactly who he was.
Wow.
It is literal family history. And the professional advice is to order extra copies, specifically because they are saved as historical archives.
It's a small investment in the long-term family archive.
It truly is.
So, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. We've looked at the psychology of the fold, the structural design, the heavy paper, the long-term legacy. When we finally synthesize this entire deep dive, what are we really saying to you, the listener?
I think we are ultimately saying that the Gatefold program is a perfect marriage of form and feeling.
Form and feeling.
Uh,
I like that.
it's important to note that it doesn't replace simpler formats entirely. A simple bifold card is perfectly fine for many services, but the Gatefold offers an elevated alternative.
Right.
It's specifically for those families who want the physical print material to perfectly match the immense significance of the actual service.
It's all about matching the container to the content.
Exactly. If the life that was lived was big and complex and beautiful, the document reflecting it should have some physical weight to it. It should have interesting layers. It should have doors.
And the defining strength of all of it is the required physical interaction.
Yes. The guests don't just passively glance at it. They actively open it. They slowly read it. They quietly reflect. The object itself dictates a highly respectful engagement. It forces us all to be fully present.
And that actually brings us perfectly to our closing thought for the day, a bit of a provocation for you, the listener, to mull over.
I'm ready. Let's hear it.
We've been talking for a while now about how a simple, clever fold in a piece of heavy paper, just a tiny bit of structural design, can radically change how we mentally process a life story. It physically slows us down. It makes us open literal doors to a memory.
It fundamentally changes the cognitive experience.
Exactly. So here's the question for you to ponder. If the physical structure of a paper funeral program can force us to actually pause and reflect, rather than just mindlessly consume information,
Right.
what other everyday, mundane objects in your life could be entirely redesigned to do the exact same thing?
Oh, wow. That is a fascinating question.
Because we live in a world of entirely frictionless design right now. We want everything instantly fast. Swipe, tap, done, next video, next post.
Instant gratification.
But maybe, just maybe, some things really should have friction built into them. What if your personal journal had a heavy physical latch that took 5 full seconds to open?
Right.
What if your smartphone had a literal cover that required a gentle two-handed unfolding before you could nervously check your work email on a Sunday?
Would we end up consuming less and actually appreciating more?
I really think we might. Maybe we just need a lot more gatefolds in our daily lives. More physical things that explicitly require us to use 2 hands, stop breathing so fast, and gently open the doors before we enter.
Intentional friction for intentional living. I absolutely love that closing thought.
Something for you all to think about the next time you hold a simple piece of paper in your hands. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the surprisingly complex, unexpected world of Gatefold Funeral Programs.
It was a true privilege to be here.
We'll see you all next time.
Goodbye.